Tonight, one day away, the 50th anniversary of the March for Life. The first since the bombshell Supreme Court decision overturning Roe versus Wade.
Yes, we are in a post-Roe world, but we're really in a new world.
Plus, Lifeline.
We care both for women, their preborn children, and then child after birth as well.
Caring for mothers and their babies in a post-Roe world. And bailout.
Too many people are in jail before they're convicted of an offense.
Calls to reform a system backed against the poor. All this and more on Faith Nation. The fight for the unborn in a post-Roe America. Good evening from the CBN News studio in Washington. I'm Tara Merchiner. Well, more than 6 months since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, and the abortion landscape of the U.S. looks significantly different. Some states now essentially ban abortion, while others have passed laws to strengthen abortion rights. With the March for Life just one day away, Caitlin Burke brings us a look at the state of abortion in America. Caitlin.
Tara, thousands of people will gather in Washington Friday for the 50th annual March for Life. The march was established a year after the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision established a nationwide right to abortion. This will be the first march since the High Court struck that law down last June.
We really see this March for Life as one of the most significant yet. Yes, we are in a post-Roe world, but we're really in a new world. What the Supreme Court did in June was they gave this issue to the people and their elected representatives.
Since then, abortion services have nearly ceased to exist in 14 states. In Texas, for example, according to the most recent state data, only 3 abortions were reported for the month of August, all for medical reasons. That's a 99.9% decrease from June. Many of the states now considered the most restrictive had trigger laws go into effect immediately or shortly after Roe was overturned.
The Attorney General of Missouri has now just tweeted that it's the first state to let its trigger laws spring into action, that the abortion is now banned as of today.
Meanwhile, legislatures in other states immediately got to work passing laws to protect abortion rights. President Biden pledging the full support of the federal government.
The first bill that I will send to the Congress will be to codify Roe v. Wade. And when Congress passes it, I'll sign it in January, 50 years after Roe was first decided the law of the land.
That, however, was before the midterm elections. With Republicans now in control of the House, Biden's pledge goes nowhere. And the GOP is already getting to work on multiple pro-life priorities.
I think we have some work to do, but I think there, for example, the condemnation of the violence against pro-life centers, that should pass the Senate. Who could go on record and say they think that's okay? So we'll present to them some challenging things. If they're going to vote against it, I think the voters will take that into account in the next cycle in 2024.
In years past, the path of the March for Life has led to the Supreme Court. This year, pro-lifers will march to the steps of the U.S. Capitol, signaling a new phase for the movement and symbolic of the work still to be done to protect the unborn at the state and federal level. Tara?
Caitlin, thank you. Well, to discuss, we're joined now by Penny Nance, President and CEO of Concerned Women for America. Penny, breaking news tonight. The Supreme Court says that its investigation cannot identify the person who leaked the draft opinion overturning Roe last spring, and the High Court's decision overturning Roe this summer largely unchanged from that draft. So what do you make of that?
And I do wonder how that they can enforce security going forward. If the answer is we just don't know and we can't find out, how can they be sure that this won't continue and reoccur? So I don't think this is the end of it, but I find it very disappointing. On the other hand, though, we are so joyful and jubilant here at the 50th anniversary after the overturn of Roe v. Wade. This is the year of Jubilee, Tara, in the Bible, in Ecclesiastes, which incidentally is the place where the good intentions of reading the Bible through in a year often go to die. But it's a really important book, and it talks about the year of Jubilee as an economic and a cultural reset. And I truly believe that's where we are as a nation. We are seeing some great indicators. Good polling came out yesterday from Marist and Knights of Columbus, showing that the vast majority of Americans think that abortion should not be legal after the first trimester. Now, that's not in line with Concerned Women for America and me, that thinks that we should only have life exception, thinks we should protect life from conception to natural death. But it certainly isn't in line with where many states are and where the Democrats have been on this issue. So we're seeing great progress. I would also add that we have an incredible piece of legislation that Concerned Women for America has worked with Congresswoman Nancy Mace and Senator Marco Rubio to introduce, called Standing with Moms Act. It's an alternatives bill that creates life.gov, where a young woman in any state can go on. Once we pass this and it comes under HHS, they'll be able to find out where all the alternatives are for them in their state and their zip code, everything from education to housing to health care to adoption services, all the many, many resources that women need in order to choose life. And so we not only want to work on this from a legislative front, protect the unborn, we also want to make it as easy as possible for a young woman to choose life.
Well, Penny, while we have you here, we're going to talk about some of the attacks we've seen on pro-life centers all across the country. Today in Portland, the FBI announcing they're offering a $25,000 reward in 3 of these incidents. Is it enough being done to prosecute these attacks, do you think?
Right. There hasn't been very much. There's been nothing done, actually, until this point. Concerned Women for America's offices were vandalized. We were part of that group. Over 100 attacks on pregnancy care centers and organizations that were pro-life happened by domestic terrorists. And, you know, DOJ turned their head. They didn't care. The FBI didn't investigate. Now we're finally seeing some action. I think it is actually in response for the fact that we're going to have hundreds of thousands of pro-lifers here in the nation's capital tomorrow. But it's just starting, and there's a lot to do. On the other hand, we're seeing that, you know, people who dare to pray in front of abortion clinics are being dragged out of their homes and prosecuted. There is really an unevenness in the prosecution of the law. It goes to a range of issues in this nation. It needs to end.
Right, Penny. Well, here's to a safe event tomorrow. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate your thoughts as always. Well, critics accuse those who oppose abortion rights of not caring for mothers or their babies once the children are born. Longtime pro-life advocates argue that's untrue. CBN's Abigail Robertson highlights one pro-life ministry that's been doing the work for decades and how that work is changing in post-Roe America.
For 40 years, Lifeline Children's Services has been caring for women dealing with unexpected pregnancies, letting them know they have options while meeting both tangible and spiritual needs.
Our mission is to equip the body of Christ to care for vulnerable children, their mothers, and their families.
Chelsea Sobolik tells CBN News Lifeline is licensed in 17 states and has an international presence as well.
We care both for women, their preborn children, and then child after birth as well.
Additionally, Lifeline helps children in the foster care system.
We have a program called Harbor Families that will provide respite care before a child ever enters into the foster care system. We provide pregnancy counseling for a woman to truly feel empowered to make either a parenting decision if that's in her best interest and the child's best interest, but also to make an adoption plan if that's where she feels led.
Chelsea says the key is partnerships with local churches.
We really do want to make sure that women have what they need. And that, again, they feel seen and loved in the hope of the gospel. And then those children are also taken care of.
Born in Romania and adopted as a baby, she sees this work as very personal.
Adoption has been normal for me my entire life because that's how our family was built.
At 17, Chelsea learned she wouldn't be able to have children. She and her husband are currently pursuing an international adoption through Lifeline and trusting God to grow their family.
He has called us to this and that he is directing our steps and he knows who our children are.
And Chelsea bristles at accusations that pro-life advocates only care about political wins and not the women involved.
look back at the work done over the past 40, 50 years. There have been hundreds and hundreds of pregnancy resource centers started all over the country to care for the practical needs of women. Christians are 3 times more likely to adopt than people who don't have faith. The church has been serving women for decades.
Chelsea adds, while it's too early to gauge the impact of the Supreme Court's decision on adoption in America, Lifeline stands ready to help both the women and children affected in post-Roe America. Reporting from Washington, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
And as we mentioned, tomorrow is the 50th March for Life. CBN News will be carrying live coverage from that event, and you can find that beginning at 12 p.m. Eastern on the CBN News Channel and our YouTube page. CBN is a sponsor of this year's march. From unemployment to inflation and everything in between, the impacts that matter to you, next on Faith Nation. Welcome back. With warnings of recession facing this country, the American job market remaining resilient still. New numbers today from the Labor Department show a drop in new jobless claims, down to about 190,000 last week. That is the lowest number in about 5 months. Meanwhile, today, America hit its debt limit. The Treasury Department is taking steps to make sure the country can pay the bills for the next few months, but the move sets up a battle on Capitol Hill over raising the debt ceiling by early June. So here with us now is Mark Hamrick, Washington Bureau Chief and Senior Economic Analyst for Bankrate. Mark, let's start with the debt ceiling. The Treasury informed Congress today that extraordinary measures are now in place to pay our bills until June. So what happens if lawmakers cannot find some middle ground in this stalemate before then?
Well, it's unacceptable. It's widely agreed, Tara, that were the U.S. to take the unprecedented step of defaulting on its debt, that it would create a financial crisis, it would create a recession, throw many Americans out of work, and really tell all creditors who have invested in U.S. debt, that's Treasury bonds and bills, that the U.S. is no longer a risk-free haven for investing. And that would cause interest rates to skyrocket, it would cause a big sell-off on the stock market, would cause unemployment. So this is really a self-inflicted kind of injury we're talking about. It's worth noting, Tara, this debt ceiling idea or legislation or law has been around for more than a century, and Congress has had to lift it dozens and dozens of times. So it's a wholly ineffectual tool in the sense of restraining spending. Congress and the presidents have already committed to spending. This is making good on the obligations.
Right. So I think you just touched on it there just a little bit. Explain some of these extraordinary measures and what do they really mean for us Americans?
Well, in terms of the extraordinary measures, they're actually fairly uneventful. It obviously causes a different kind of work for the U.S. Treasury, but it's really just managing its money in a different way. For example, not making payments that it would typically have to make within its accounting realm, and it's not essentially failing to make good on payments. It's more along the lines of where the government owes virtual federal accounts rather than paying people outside the federal government. So this is why we could say it's extraordinary, or the Treasury calls it extraordinary. It is unusual, but it's not unprecedented. A default is unprecedented.
Gotcha. And some good news this week on the inflation front. New data showing wholesale inflation is down in December. What is driving that decrease?
Well, primarily gasoline prices, Tara, and I think anyone who drives or is reliant on transportation welcomes all of that. Gasoline prices had been sort of the major fly in the ointment, as it were, as inflation was on the way up, and inflation broadly does seem to be on the way down. Historically, it's still high on a year-over-year basis. Both the consumer price index and the producer price index, retail level inflation and wholesale level are still up 6% year over year, but it does appear that inflation peaked some time ago. The Fed may have won the war on inflation and can begin to stop with the aggressive interest rate increases.
Right. And Mark, thank you so much for joining us. Certainly a lot to watch here in the days to come. Tough times looks like they're ahead. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you.
All right, they have not been convicted of a crime, and yet they are still stuck in jail. How some states are reforming cash bail and freeing 500,000 Americans. That is coming up next. Did you know that more than 500,000 Americans are being held in jail without a conviction? Many are there because they simply cannot afford to post bail. Now, this issue has led to calls for reforming or eliminating the cash bail system altogether. Charlene Aaron has that story.
Cash bail is used as a guarantee that a defendant will return to court for hearings or trial. While there are growing calls to reform the system, some say it pits the need for safety against the rights of the poor. In 2010, New York police arrested Khalif Browder for allegedly stealing a backpack in a Bronx neighborhood. Browder, 16 at the time, spent the next 3 years behind bars awaiting trial. A trial that never happened because Browder ended up taking his own life. His case points to a common problem for many who can't afford bond. Kate Trammell is Vice President of Advocacy at Prison Fellowship.
But what we have right now is a system where too many people are in jail before they're convicted of an offense. I don't think you can say concretely from the numbers that everyone in jail is a criminal, and if they are awaiting trial in jail, then releasing them is dangerous.
According to a report by the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, more than 60% of defendants are detained pre-trial because they can't afford to post bail. Those numbers have moved a number of states to take action, but courts have weighed in too. For example, on Saturday, the Illinois State Supreme Court halted a law that would have done away with the state's cash bail system before it was scheduled to go into effect on Sunday, January 1st. Under that law, suspects charged with felonies, including second-degree murder, aggravated battery, and arson, would have been released without bail. While supporters say the current bail system proves unfair to low-income defendants, Illinois law enforcement officials and prosecutors argue it will let dangerous criminals back on the streets while sending the message that people can get away with breaking the law.
Our hands will be tied. The police officers' hands will be tied. The judges, and we'll have this. What you see in Chicago, we'll have here. I won't be able to hold anybody in jail longer than 90 days if they demand trial. And at the 90th day, they get out. No matter what crime they committed, it's going to be literally the end of days.
Pastor Garland Hunt of the Father's House in Atlanta once served as president of Prison Fellowship and on the Georgia State Board of Pardons and Paroles. He says while there are flaws in the criminal justice system, cash bail is needed in cases involving major crimes.
If you've been consistently having assault charges, violent homicides, and all these trespassing, kidnappings, rapes, those kind of people need more accountability because they also become a greater risk for bail. After bail, they would still risk. They could run, they could not come back.
As a former magistrate, Trammell says low-income people can't always pay cash bail and end up having to stay in jail until trial, something she believes creates a two-tiered justice system.
Money is not a great way to determine risk, right? So you can have someone who is at high risk who can pay a high sum to get out, and you can have someone very low risk who just doesn't have access to cash.
Trammell points to other solutions that are fairer without raising safety concerns.
Jurisdictions across the country are testing things like text reminders. Often people fail to appear for court for a variety of reasons that don't include committing a new crime. And so things like text reminders for low-risk defendants help them get to trial on time and not get deeper in the system.
According to the Prison Policy Initiative, there are also stark racial disparities surrounding pretrial detention rates. In large urban areas, young black felony defendants are about 50% more likely than white defendants to be held pretrial.
People carry their biases into the courtroom, whether it's a public defender, whether it's a district attorney, whether it's a judge. And so when their biases are there, and even could be even with law enforcement, we have to say, because we're all human, we bring our humanity into whatever our field is.
The media's portrayal of minorities add to the problem, according to Hunt.
When they show a lot of bad things that are happening, violent things that happen, usually it's about 60–70% black faces. So what happens in the mind of law enforcement, politicians, DAs, judges, is that that's where the trouble is, as opposed to maybe a person in another suburb area, maybe they, were driving drunk, but they're driving a nice car. It's a different environment.
For that reason, Hunt believes the church's voice is needed for healing and confronting inequities in the system.
The fact that we use incarceration as much as we do, we're not talking about trying to change people. The cycle of recidivism is like 60% after 3 years goes right back into the system. So how do we adjust that? And that's a responsibility not only of the criminal justice system, but also the church.
Trammell agrees.
And my faith compels me to have an answer for them, even if that answer is just coming alongside them and helping them through the process that is the justice process.
A process many agree should provide safe communities and equity for all. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
The next generation heads to Capitol Hill. We'll explain why these babies were brought to Washington when Faith Nation returns. Finally tonight, 3 moms, 3 kids, and a powerful pro-life plea on Capitol Hill. A group of women met with lawmakers today as part of Heartbeat International's Baby Go to Congress campaign. Their message, pregnancy centers are great for America. These moms and babies are living proof of the good such resource centers can be, each mom telling a different story about how their life and their babies was saved.
It's just an honor to be able to share about my life and my daughter's life and how living in a maternity home and accessing pregnancy resources saved my life and saved her life.
Now, since the campaign's first trip in 2009, the group has sent more than 180 moms and babies to Capitol Hill, visiting nearly 400 congressional offices. Wow, what a sight. Well, that's going to do it for Faith Nation. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us.